Very good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to today's uLaw webinar. The topic for today's webinar is Getting Ready for Law Society Audits. This particular webinar has been accredited for 1 hour of professionalism CPD credits in the provinces of Ontario, British Columbia, and New Brunswick. Once again, I repeat, the title for today's webinar, which has been accredited for 1 hour of professionalism credits, is Getting Ready for Law Society Audits. As always, I request you to use the chat window at all times to ask any specific questions that you may have regarding today's webinar. And both myself as well as my support staff would be more than happy to pick up these questions as we move along. Like every other uLaw webinar, today's webinar has this very specific agenda, which we're going to talk about, covering the importance of the audit process. What is this audit process to begin with? Why should one go through this audit process, or what is the purpose of this audit process? Why was it designed to be the way it is? How can you, as a legal practitioner or a legal firm, prepare yourself and appreciate and understand the importance of this audit process and the components and the documents that you may be asked for during this audit process. So we're going to definitely look at the audit process, the top areas where we feel, or not feel really, but looking at the documentation in terms of the various reports that are being asked in these spot audits. We've pretty much grouped it under practice, financial review, and technology review. That's kind of the top three. And of course, there's professional conduct reviews as well that may be conducted as part of the audit process. But a big part of our focus for today is going to be looking at the practice, financial, and the technology review. Okay. So what is the audit? And always the question that we ask ourselves, why me? And again, this is taken from Wiki as well as from the Law Society's websites. But the purpose of this audit, and you call it spot audit, or however you want to call it, was meant to support and really promote a high quality of record keeping within a legal firm, right? And it was meant really to provide guidance, proactive measure, answer any questions, because many of these audit processes are now conducted for legal firms that have just started within the first 12 to 18 months as more of a form of providing guidance, understanding the way your legal firm has been doing their bookkeeping, appreciating the best practices that you have, providing feedback on areas of improvement, and of course, the worst case scenario where they find that there is a very clear motive of misappropriation, then there's different remediations, different paths that may take. Okay. Now, given that the legal industry or the legal firms have the opportunity to accept money from your prospective clients and clients in advance of doing or executing a complete project, accepting money as a retainer, accepting money into what's devised as a trust account to receive this retainer, you can most certainly expect that the Law Society is going to look at your trust record-keeping reports and documents. But the Law Society also looks at your operating account, your general record-keeping, and of course provides guidance, as I mentioned before, to ensure compliance with the bookkeeping guidelines that have already been documented by the Law Society, which you've probably gone through during your education. And to the question of why me, and reiterating that the original intent of the audit process, as we understand it, was designed as a very proactive measure to not only understand your current state of affairs with regards to bookkeeping, but also as a great problem detection mechanism. Right? So if you've been going down a path, and let's say you've not had the guidance, you're not using the right tools, and you're just pretty much on your own, the spot audit can really be an opportunity for you to learn where you've gone wrong, where you can mend, and really take corrective measures to come back into the alignment of what the bookkeeping guideline talks about and what the expectations from the Law Society is. I'm going to take a quick break out of my slide share and encourage you to do this Google search, or if you can just search spot audit, and you could say the province, or you can go to your individual Law Society websites. You can just search, if you're in Ontario, LSO, spot audit. I have found a website for British Columbia as well that talks about the compliance audits, and pretty much all provinces across Canada, the law societies across Canada have an understanding or definite documentation on what the spot audit is, the expectation out of these compliance audits, right? What you should expect would happen during the day of the audit. How is an audit scheduled to begin with? And then, of course, it talks about the non-compliance, the next steps based on non-compliance. And in Ontario, for example, it's the Bylaw 9, which really talks about the bookkeeping guidelines. So you can just search spot audit, and it pretty much gives you all the information that you need. And you can see it clearly states that it promotes and supports high-quality law firm record keeping. And this is exactly what we've taken out of that spot audit into the agenda. Okay. We've also looked at the books, records, and files that are required. Again, this is not a surprise because law societies give you this information well ahead of time. So the act of being caught by surprise would not hold because this information is already available, and as part of your education, what we hope is that you have enough clarity on what you would be expected to provide when that day comes when you do get audited. Okay? And this is a very comprehensive document. You can clearly see right from trust receipts to referral fee journals. You know, that's pretty much our source of contact, really understanding where your referral fee is coming from. Trust receipts journals, your general receipts and disbursements journals, checkbooks, and of course, you have various other documents that are defined. Same thing goes for other provinces. Each province may have its own little nuance of the expectation in terms of documents, in terms of provincial specific documents as well, right? For example, in the province of Ontario, you have a form called Form 9A, which is the electronic transmission document when you're doing trust transfers electronically from a trust account into a general account. And each province has its own specific documents that they ask for. Okay, so I encourage you to visit Google, search up Law Society audits, and really understand the purpose of it and the expectation out of that. If you need further guidance, the Law Societies are available for you to reach out to, or you could reach out to us as we offer not a guidance really, but as part of our platform, what we've done is we've looked at the bookkeeping compliance and really given a thorough scan of each and every specific document needed, especially around financial management as part of what the features have to offer. So the question really comes down to, what am I being audited on, right? And do I prepare myself after I've been requested for a spot audit or scheduled for one, scampering at the last minute, or is there an opportunity for you to do it by design right from day one so that you don't have to worry about the spot audit? It happens when it happens because you're already ready for this, okay? From a top, I would say 4 buckets of reviews, if you were to call them. We start with the practice review. So hopefully you can now start to think about, is your firm managing your client information, the client intake process, how you draft your retainer or engagement letter, how do you open your matters, are they unique in nature, how do you manage the closure of these files, all of the procedural guidelines that you take in managing your client, file, or matter information, right from that initial intake to the closure letter. The financial review talks about how you as a legal firm handle money coming into both the trust and general accounts, and whether you're doing this based on the bookkeeping guidelines provided by the individual law societies. So for example, if taking money into a trust account, ensuring that there is an invoice or there's a legal document that you can showcase for before you do a trust transfer, ensuring that the trust transfer reflects the actual amount in the invoice. It's not just a random number, right? Or if it's just purely based out of the operating account, ensuring that you're doing the right thing in terms of managing fees, disbursements, costs involved with delivering your services for that particular matter. From a technology review, of course, Law Society audits may ask you for the safety measurements that you have taken to protect yourself and your firm and your client from catastrophic technology failures. And of course, I know this is a big statement, so often the questions that we talk about that legal firms should ask themselves is depending on the support services and the tools that you have in your arsenal to deliver your services, making sure that this is one specific question that you ask these service providers, whether that's a software service provider or if it's an individual that's helping you. So your bookkeeper, your accountant, what happens if they close shop? All this information. If this is a software that you're using, how secure is the provider in terms of data security, in terms of availability? Of course, ensuring that there's enough documentation to show for when you're being asked for it. Or if you're not using this and you're just by yourself and you're using a computer and you're managing all of this information in that local machine or maybe in the cloud, and you've taken the onus on yourself to do this, of course you can just take a Word document and pretty much type in what you have taken as a measure to manage the safety procedures to safeguard the data. Okay? Of course, as I mentioned before, professional rules of conduct, you really need to be thinking about, and there's a separate section that really talks about professional rules of conduct, and we're not going to cover too much of that in today's webinar. That's something that you should definitely keep in mind as you manage your business. And what we believe is if you can build this compliance and audit readiness as part of the DNA of your firm, not for yourself, everyone in the firm that's involved, then you pretty much are going to be ready for this from day one. Okay? I know it's easier said than done, but it is certainly possible. So how do I prepare for this audit? Let's say I am sold on this concept of being ready from day one. First, appreciating, of course, that the audit process was not designed primarily to scare you and your firm or your legal firm. There were, again, proactive measures to find issues and correct them early enough. So that's why we talk about a lot of the audits happening today within the first 12 to 14 months of you starting a business. And of course, if you haven't had that audit, and let's say you've been randomly chosen after 3 years, then you're going to be audited based on the 3 years of data that they're looking for. And sometimes it may be a little bit more comprehensive, a little bit more detailed, depending on the nature of the business that you run, nature of the data that you have as well. Okay? So one of the first things that we encourage legal firms to do is, depending whether you're just getting started or you've been in business for quite a while, is start from understanding your current process to manage this data and the information that's being requested by you through these review and spot audit process. Okay, so maybe going through in thorough all of the documents that will be asked for in that spot audit. First, that's important, right? So you really need to know what are you being tested against. So first, appreciating what those are, and then finding the right methods, support system to allow you as the legal firm, whether it's an individual or a group of people managing it, to find a way that using the support system, using the tools that you have, that you're able to deliver this. If not a weekly basis, we certainly encourage you to start thinking a bi-weekly basis. Of course, we're used to this thought process of waiting for the end of the month. That was a very convenient time period. But with the advent of technology and with everything that's happening around, the need for doing multiple matters at the same time, doing more with less time, we certainly believe times have changed where you now have the opportunity to start thinking about all of this data at least on a bi-weekly basis. You do not have to wait till the end of the month to start thinking about this. And again, you're not spending hours and hours in reviewing this information. You're spending max maybe 30 to 45 minutes making sure that you have a checklist and you're going through this checklist real quick, maybe on a weekend, whatever helps, or on a day that's really not busy, and finding that spare time to go through this checklist that can reflect your readiness for these audits. A good example would be reviewing your financial statements, trust ledger, your general ledger, your journals on a weekly or a bi-weekly basis, understanding your trust balances, understanding where the money is in, and not being overly dependent on a system or a person to give you this information. You want to use your service providers, your tools, your software products to enable you, but not to leave you at a point where you are extremely dependent on them to understand this information. Okay. To give you an example of some of the checklists that we think are meaningful, bank accounts in terms of weekly reviewing your bank transactions on a weekly basis. A Saturday morning or a Sunday morning with a cup of coffee to really go through your bank, your transactions, and comparing it with your bookkeeping system, whether that's an Excel sheet, whether that's a software, cloud-based or non-cloud-based, whatever that may be. Understanding your ledgers, journals, reconciliation statements. As I mentioned before, you can generate a single document for the end of that term as a month, but you can also always review these reconciliations on a daily basis almost if you need to. Not that would be a little extreme, but at least on a bi-weekly basis. Again, because then you're not caught off guard at the end of the month if you have to make any adjustments to the data that has been entered before you reconcile. Some good candidates for quarterly reviews. Again, we're talking about weekly, bi-weekly, or monthly, and then now we're moving into our quarterly practice management checklist. Is the templatization that you have around the documents that you deliver that are client-facing. Right? So all of the client communication documents, your retainer letters, your intake document, even your matter management procedures. So how long does it take from the time a customer has walked in and has signed that client intake form or has given you that information? How long does it you and your legal firm together take to service that client? When is that retainer letter sent out? Is it sent the same day? What's the time and effort that it takes? Are you doing this manually? Are you expecting that signed document to be returned back in a mail? Are you allowing your customers to pay you through modern payment processing gateways? Or are you still waiting for that check to be either, again, mailed or deposited into a bank? All of those aspects. Right? And a nice yearly review system would be understanding the health of your overall business, especially if you've been in business for a few years now. I'm sure and certain that you're going through this already, coming to the end of the year, you're going to start reviewing, how did I do this year in 2021? What are the areas that I can improve upon? And most often, we're always thinking about revenue. Right? We're always thinking about, how do I get more revenue into my business? And the immediate next thought after that is there an opportunity for me to cut costs, so reduce my expenses? Pretty straightforward, right? Either we're thinking about how to improve revenue, the top line, or reduce the bottom line, that of expenses. But if this search or this exploration of information around these two buckets can be supplemented with data that you're capturing and reporting on a regular basis, then there is a fundamental reasoning and a very strong reasoning that is now supported by data for you to now look at 2022 and take the corrective measures or improvements to your business based on that. Instead of just randomly saying, okay, this year was great, but I want to get more revenue, and then the first 3 months goes about in you just understanding how to get there based on data, based on facts that you have stored within your system of record. Compare that with your expected milestone for 2022, and then make a decision based on that. So what we've done is we've broken down, and there's of course quite a bit of checklist items that you can pretty much cover within a practice management review. We've conducted specific webinars that talk about Practice Management 101, the obligations that you have as a legal practitioner towards practice management in general. But we've kind of summarized some of the top elements that you should think about when it comes to practice management, right? So we've looked at client service and communication, matter management, fee structure handling, and then we move on, of course, to the financial management, right? So within the practice management, we first take client service and communication. And we've done a very specific webinar just around this, right? But bottom line is looking at that intake process, finding new modern ways that you can get detailed information that you can validate so that you don't spend all that time validating, let's say, fake data that comes in. A good example is maybe you have a great website that asks for some high-level information for prospective clients to fill in. What happens is if you're not secured enough and now you're being attacked by, let's say, a bot. I mean, we talk about how these automated bots can pretty much fill out information, fake information into your system. Rather, if you have a secure way of asking for pertinent information, and if that information is not provided, and mostly can only be provided by human beings instead of these Autobots, for lack of a better term, taking over, then you already have that first checklist of validated information coming into your system. Okay, so starting with that client intake process to now you being ready with retainers. So do you have, let's say you serve 5 areas of practices within your legal firm. Do you at least have 1 or 2 different templates in each of these buckets of areas of practices ready to go so that anytime someone walks in with a requirement in that bucket of area of practice that you're automatically being able to send that information right away? Okay. How do you manage retainers today? For example, are you predominantly accepting cash retainers? Because you know that up to a certain amount, let's say $7,500, you can receive cash retainers. So depending on the areas of practices, this may change, right? But understanding your current business. So are you accepting cash retainers? In which case, then you have the added responsibility of providing receipts for these retainers. So are you providing that? Do you have a copy of each and every cash retainer receipt that you have actually received and delivered to your client? Because that would be an important question to ask, because that's a question that the audit is going to ask you. Or if it's electronic, what's the next best thing? Do you accept email transfer? Do you take credit card? What are those different electronic procedures that you use to accept retainers? Now, if you're in the business, for example, let's say you're doing a lot of landlord and tenant board, do you have a very well articulated retainer letter that deals with joint retainership, where there are multiple parties involved that you're serving, right? Because that can be a little more of a different approach, because now you have more than one party involved who you're serving. In some cases, you may have multiple, right? Some of the legal firms manage LATB matters where you could have 5 or 6 parties as joint parties that retain you for their service, right? So going back to understanding the documents that you have, the templates that you have, and if you don't have them, and if you're looking to serve that area of practice, finding ways to document these templates. Now, do you have a procedure to manage complaints? How do you clarify any questions that your clients, prospective clients may ask you before, during, and after a file has been executed? What type of documents do you provide in the form of status or updates to your clients, and how often do you offer that update? Because this would vary based on the nature of the business, and hence it always comes back to fundamentally the specific expertise or specialities of areas of practices that you and your legal firm focus, and then tailoring all of this practice management specific to that. Because if you're not doing, let's say, criminal matter, you really don't have to worry about specific templatization for that area of practice. You want to focus on what you're good at and build templates that can make you more prudent and cadent in front of your client, but also allow you to measure and manage what's important from an audit process. Last but not the least, again, I can go through this, but something that we talk about all the time, and I believe we're getting to a point where a lot of our clients are already having this, is a well-reviewed non-engagement letter. So the opportunity and the ability to say no to a client, and there could be many reasons for that. There could be maybe, and again, it's a two-way street. So how do you, what kind of opportunity do you provide your client to non-engage you for a specific reason? Okay, that's important for you to understand as well. So we've just talked about templates here of how you manage a client and how you manage information coming into your business. And moving to the next phase, let's say you've done that intake, you've started the matter, and you're going through it. These are some of the simple things that the Law Society talks about for you to better manage your time and the file. So easy things is uniqueness to the file, ensuring that there's a good file naming convention so that there are not multiple file numbers with different, or the same file number for different matters. Easier for you to organize information within your business so that when someone's asking you for this information, you're not scampering for it. Everyone within your firm now has the equal confidence to search the right area for that information. So maybe it's a common repository, maybe it's a cloud-based system, maybe it's a laptop with a folder in it that everyone understands access to. So there's could be many different scenarios. Now, one specific aspect that the Law Society talks about as a potential checklist within the practice management review is reviewing your retainer letter in a bit of detail. The retainer letter is reviewed, or let's call it the engagement letter. Let's say if you don't have trust involved, then it's an engagement letter. And one of the first important aspects that the auditor talks about or is looking for you to provide proof of, let's say, is how easy it is to understand that retainer letter, especially with an established nature of scope fee structure, and termination clauses. Okay, so some of the clarity that you are able to provide as a legal practitioner to your client around these specific areas. What is the nature of the scope? How much a fee are you going to charge, including fees and disbursements? What is the nature of your invoice pattern? What are any penalties and interest that may be involved if the client doesn't pay you on time? And what are those termination clauses, both from your side and from the client side? From a time management perspective, and again, this is not to audit you to find fault. This is an audit requirement or a specificity within an audit that talks about how you manage your matters. So are you able to, some tips that really provided is, are you over a period of time categorizing your files or matters across active, closed, and archived, for example? Or you can come up with your own nomenclature for this. And the purpose of this is so that you're focusing on active files and you're using closed files as a way of understanding the history, maybe for conflict searches, and those types of information. Do you manage the last activity date? That's a very important question that's being asked during an audit. Do you manage the last activity date on a file? When was the last time you opened that file or closed the file or touched that file? Right? Especially if there's a trust balance involved in that file. When was the last time that you even touched that? Because if it's after a certain period of time, then it's, again, a recommendation that you refund the retainer. Let's say it's been 7-8 years and you've not moved further. That was the last time you touched that file. It happens. But there's still about $3,000 in retainer. It's your responsibility to send the client a letter saying things have not moved, and maybe there's a reason for it, right? Articulating that reason, or if whatever reason hasn't moved thus far, then it's your obligation after a period of time to refund that retainer. So again, managing last activity date on each file, very important. And another letter that you may want to closely look at is that closure letter that we're talking about. Now, the closure letter, of course, can be a very simple letter that talks about the actual file, the nature and scope, and the outcome of that particular file after it's been completed. But most often, it's accompanied with certain other documents, such as settlement statement, statement of activity, in some cases, even bill of costs. And this, many times, is based on the request from the client. Depending on the nature of the client, could be an individual or a corporate client that may ask for specific information for their own record keeping too. So you and your legal firm should have all this information readily available to share when needed. Okay, so let's say you've got all these templates well documented, a great way to manage your client and matter information, top of your game. That's fantastic. And then they move on to the next most important, and this is probably where there's a lot of fear factor involved around financial management. Of course, this is where auditors are looking very keenly around trust numbers, money coming in, money leaving. And this is one area, of course, where we're really talking about misappropriation, right? From a financial management checklist, again, there's just a lot to cover, but given the nature of our time involved, we've kind of broken it down into these top aspects of what you should be looking at. We discussed this briefly while talking about the retainer letter, nature and scope, and the fees. But truly understanding and being very specific about the fee structure in that retainer or engagement letter really is the fundamental starting point for your financial management. Because that retainer letter, it all comes back to the retainer letter. How much you can charge, how often can you invoice, when do you recover that money, all of that comes back to the retainer letter. Okay? So let's say it's a cleanly stated retainer letter, and there's many combinations that you may decide, and that's totally left to you as a firm to provide that back to the client, saying, this is what I have to offer. You've come to me for the service. I'm really good at this, but my fee structure is a flat fee, or it could be a billable time, and I charge 400, 200, 100, whatever you're charging per hour. Right? That's my per hour fee. Or it could be a contingency matter, where saying, I won't charge you till the matter is done and won, but I would then charge you, a certain percentage on the settlement funds that we receive, or a contingency-based fee. Right? There are so many combinations. Disbursements may be dealt with separately, or if it's a simple wills matter and it's all flat fee, it's all inclusive, and then that's a totally different style. So each of these retainer letters need to reflect the fee structure involved, because that also becomes part of your financial record-keeping responsibility, which all adds up towards your reconciliation towards the end of that month or time period. Okay? An important aspect outside of the audit process from a financial management perspective is managing your disbursements so that you as a business to begin with can recover any money that you've spent out of your own pocket to begin with. And this is where we most often in many of our webinars highlight the importance and the opportunity for you as a legal firm to utilize the trust account as a financial vehicle so that you can safeguard financial interests of your firm. You're not waiting for a client to make a payment at their own leisure. You have money in your retainer, and as and when you execute certain milestones or certain dockets or pay for certain disbursements, let's say you have agreed to that retainer letter to begin with, it becomes easier for you to recover that money based on that understanding. Right? And the last thing we want to talk about from a financial management perspective, of course, all of how you manage, what you manage, the details gets converted into proper record keeping and certain templatized documents. We call them ledgers, we call them journals, all fancy terms, and we have a separate webinar that exclusively talks about that. But at the end of the day, it's the information that you're capturing from your client that gets converted into these documents. You decide the rules of the game, but the expectation is that rules are clearly defined and both parties involved understand the rules that they're playing with. And if you're dealing with cash, and that's totally fine, and that's part of your business, then it's even more important that you're able to demonstrate proof of how that money was handled. So a good example was receipts. Another example could be a deposit slip. So let's say you took that cash and request a deposit slip from your bank or your financial institution and keep a copy of it. You can keep a physical copy, file it in a manila folder, or take a digital picture of that or scan it, make it available so that it's in two places now. Because these are, especially if you're dealing, they will find out, right? As part of your audit, one of the things they will find out is the nature and how you do your business. So when you are showcasing your retainer, let's say your trust ledger and journal especially, there's a column that says method of payment. Ideally, it should say cash, and if they find that there's a lot of these cash in your trust journal, then there's a general understanding that you as a business do accept a lot of cash retainers. Because there are certain legal firms that would say no to cash retainers. They would say, no, I'm sorry, please do send me an electronic mode or means of sending me money. Right? So going back to our example of a cash retainer, you can be certain that if they understand, the audit understands that cash is a big part of your retainer ownership, then they're going to ask you for receipts, deposit slips. Not all of them, maybe not all of them, but a good sample to show that you are now on the right path and you understand the process behind the importance of certain documents that complement the nature of how you deliver a business. Okay? And it's in line with the bookkeeping guidelines and the record keeping guidelines that have been already mandated by the law societies. I don't want to dwell too much into this. This is one of the hot topics that we talk about all the time in terms of how best to manage a retainer. Of course, the wiki definition of that is that's a fee paid in advance in order to secure or keep their services, right? But if you really look at the important aspects that should be in a retainer, we've discussed this many times: nature and scope of work, client obligation. So clearly state the rules and talk about the obligation that the client has with regards to their participation in this business relationship. So paying me on time, maybe responding back in a required manner, in a timely manner, and you define what that is. But it's important also to define what happens if that's not met. The one is to define what your expectation is. The other is to define what happens if that expectation is not met. A simple example, of course, would be any interest that you may charge, so that it's not a shocker to the client when they receive the next bill along with the previous bill that was not paid with an interest on top of it. Because now you can always go back to that retainer letter, engagement letter, saying, here you go, my friend. This is something that we had already agreed, and you can see it's not fine print anymore. Clear and bold and out there as part of the client obligation. The frequency of communication, that includes the invoice schedule, termination clauses, non-engagements, your need for using third-party consultants if needed, right? And of course, any confidentiality terms that you're able to safeguard their information. All of that becomes part of that retainer letter. So the last aspect of financial management, we spoke about managing the cost, different ways, including cash. But then following that retainer schedule, you now move on to understanding how often you raise those invoices. Are taxes properly captured in an invoice? This, again, another key component, just like how you underline cash retainers, mandates deposit slips or receipts. You can be sure that if you're dealing with fees and costs, taxes become an important component of it. Are you charging taxes? Was taxes included? Was this disbursement inclusive of tax? Did not have tax to begin with, etc. We spoke about procedural aspects of how you manage with complaints about fees. So yes, it's 1 hour, and it's $300 per hour, but what if a client were to challenge an invoice? And that's why do you have a procedure to have what's called as a pre-bill or preview, so that you can send your client pre-bills. And this is something that you would learn as you execute your business and as you work with clients. And it may happen that certain scope of work has these clients who are always coming back to you asking for more information, explanation on why you're charging them the 2 hours of work or what went behind the 2 hours of work. Hence, do you have within your current system of record the ability to expand and explain in a very descriptive manner the work that went behind each and every docket? And how do you reflect that in an invoice? Okay? From your invoice balance perspective, again, this reflects your reconciliation as well. So let's say you don't have a trust retainer relationship with the client, and you've generally sent out an invoice and you're waiting for a payment. Let's say you're dealing with several hundred such matters in a month. Who within your business is looking after the aging report? Who in your business is looking after the money that needs to come in, accounts receivable? So looking at an invoice balance to say, this is what these many people owe me, and there's a reason to that. One is, of course, cash is king. You need to cover your costs, your fees, make your money. But the second important aspect, which is really an after the fact, but a very important reason at that, is the reconciliation process. For you to close your books that month, which clearly says, this is the amount of money I received in the month of October. This is the amount of money that has left my bank account for the month of October. So ideally, if you should have received your client payment today, but you waited till end of the month to recognize that, at the time of reconciliation, you're going to be like, I really wish I had that extra money and I should have followed up earlier enough, because that's also going to reflect your P&L for that month. Same thing with disbursements. Even worse with disbursements, because with disbursements, you've already paid for it. Assuming that you've paid out of your general account, not using trust. So now it's already affecting your bottom line. Okay, this is one of those aspects of the audit where it's meant to help you and not to catch you on the wrong foot. Okay. And auditors, if, for example, if you're not, for whatever reason, your days of sale and the amount of time that it takes for you to recover payments from clients are delayed, auditors would recommend that you start utilizing the trust account more often so that you can safeguard your own interests, because the auditors want you and the Law Society wants you to continue to run your business, represent the Law Society in all fairness, and be competitive and very successful at running the business. Because if you're not doing all of these right things to run the business, then sometimes it may happen that you don't do well in business and you're tired and you stop doing this anymore and you're doing something else. And that's a loss to yourself and a great loss to the Law Society as well. Hence, all of these checkpoints are meant for them to have an opportunity to understand how you're operating as a Law Society guideline-based business, for lack of a better term, but also how are you running your business to begin with, and see if there's any way that they can recommend improvements and corrective measures to help you get back on the right path. All right. Now, there is a well-defined document across all law societies, and you can certainly, depending on the audience that we have today, if you're from different provinces, please do visit your own law society and that really talks about the spot audit or the audit, or it's called compliance audit. And you would certainly see a document, like I showed you earlier, that clearly defines that during an audit, the different documents that are being expected. Okay? Some of the top documents, we're going to just talk about those that are definitely asked for in an audit. Your trust ledger. And if you have zero trust ledger, that's fine. But a trust ledger, trust journal, trust receipts. So now you have 3 trust-related documents. Same thing applies for general. General ledger, general journal, right? And receipts. Then you define the disbursement. You have trust disbursement journal, general disbursement or expense journals. You have your trust reconciliation report. And then you have your general reconciliation report. You have about 6 or 7 documents, and then you have your fee book and your expense books. About 8 reports thus far, give or take. Then there may be certain jurisdictional documents, as I mentioned before, such as the Form 9A. So, again, this is the rule of engagement. They're not asking for anything random out of this. And in fact, the Law Society also gives you a template as part of their bookkeeping guidelines. So if you look at the Law Society of Ontario that I've looked at, I believe there is a bookkeeping guide that really talks about how best to manage information, right? What is the general account, trust account? How do you manage it? Examples of general retainers. How do you manage cash receipts? Clearly states, when you receive cash, whether in trust or for your general, you must prepare a duplicate cash receipt. And that should identify or capture information such as the date, the person from whom this cash was received, right? Very, very straightforward. It's already there. And it's, in a way, your responsibility as a legal practitioner to have read this and be prepared for it. It's almost like a test, if you will. Okay? All right, so we looked at practice, we've looked at financial checklist, and that was pretty much the last. And then we look at technology. Now, not all audits ask for your technology review. It might be a passing question. Some auditors may actually get deeper into understanding the types of tools and areas of support that you have to manage your business. But some of the common questions that we've got from our clients and we've understood from friends in the industry, the top questions that they may ask you, and again, going back to the bookkeeping guidelines, one of the number one question is the safety of the data. So always comes back to how are you as a legal firm securing and safeguarding important confidential information, especially that involves your client information. So your client's name, their address, their phone number, right? So that it's not randomly available to anyone else. Whether it's you using your personal computer, then talking about how you have a password for it, or you're using a cloud-based system and how the cloud-based system is supposed to be or should be encrypted, should be at the minimum 256-bit encrypted these days. Even 128 does not cut it. So that's the SSL that we talk about, secured socket layer, which is pretty much band-grade security. So if your provider provides you a 256-bit encryption, and you would typically see it right at the top. So you see this little lock button. If you click on it, it gives you that the connection is secure. So this is Google, and you can also look at the certificate, right? So you can now be certain that Google has your back, that this particular presentation or all of the information that I've stored in this Google Cloud is secure. Same thing with, let's say, uLaw. This would be with all of your other practice management systems, legal accounting systems. This is a starting point. Okay? If you're not using cloud-based systems, again, as I mentioned before, how often do you back up your own data? What happens if your laptop crashes? You know, those are the common questions from a disaster recovery perspective, right? How are you able to recover from, as I mentioned before, a catastrophic incident? If this is in the cloud, how often does your data get backed up? Where is that data stored? Is it available south of the border? Because there are some, tax and laws around it. Are you, as an individual, running antivirus software on your machines that you're using, especially if your data is locally stored? So do prepare yourself to ask the questions to your provider or to yourself if you're doing this yourself. Document the answers in terms of how are you safeguarding your client's data, and have that document available, just like how you have a retainer letter available. Also clearly state, because that's the nature of the business, we're in this internet world where there is a leap of faith. And I think we've crossed that. We're crossing this bridge with that leap of faith. We're not questioning beyond a point, because almost businesses are pushing us there, right, to be taking that leap of faith with technology and internet. Likewise, the nature of business for you to work does have certain pros and cons. So indicate clearly. The simplest example that I can provide you is the risk involving email communication. So who do you use as a provider? I mean, you can create your own email client. You're pretty much going to use one of the several commonly found email providers, whether that's Google, Microsoft, right, Yahoo, Hotmail, maybe some other local providers. So what happens if their system crashes? What if their system is compromised? What happens to all those email communications that have gone back and forth? So what's your plan of action, or your disaster recovery plan of action for that? How long does it take for these providers to give you your data back? These are some of the questions that you want to ask and find the answers for around technology review. Okay. And really the last component of the presentation is not to talk about a specific product, but to talk about a certain type of product, a certain line of business that has matured over this last several years now. I've been conducting these webinars for about 14 years, and I've seen a very strong maturity in the legal tech space over these, especially in the last 5 years, where it's a very mature space. People exactly understand what is needed to deliver a safe, secure, compliant practice management accounting, legal accounting space to their customers. And hence, you have the choice now to review, to do research, to take a test drive trial with all these systems. And we recommend a legal accounting software, especially here in Canada, where we have compliance mandated, where you have these compliance audits, spot audits as they're called, specifically around financial management too. If you're not using legal accounting software, that's totally fine. So then find the right service provider, the right bookkeeping personnel or the accounting personnel who can help you with providing all of these documents that you're going to need to provide as part of the audit process. And how much time, how much of money, how much of effort you take in delivering these documents is the million-dollar question. Okay? As I said, there's quite a few reference material in the internet around spot audit, audit checklist, frequently asked questions, and bookkeeping guidelines. For friends in Ontario, please visit LSO, and then I just typed in LSO audit. And there's a specific web page that talks about it. It's fantastic. Same thing for British Columbia. And you can do the same thing for any province. Right? So, once again, the topic for today's webinar was getting ready for your Law Society audit, no matter which province you're from, understanding why this audit was designed to begin with, what's required for you as the legal practitioner to provide as part of the audit. We talked about the practice review around documents, templates that are meant right from client intake to managing matters, files, a financial review on how you're managing funds coming in, reflecting the retainer agreement that you have to begin with, generating those 6 to 10 documents that we spoke about from ledgers, journals, fee book, expense book, and provincial documents like Form 9A, a technology review around how you manage and ensure the safety of your client's information. Those are the top 3 areas that we covered, and of course I mentioned before, there is, as part of your audit, a component of professional conduct review, which of course we didn't cover as part of this webinar, but something that you should keep in mind. I am top of the hour, in fact a minute late, so I do thank you for your presence today. If there are any specific questions that you'd like to ask myself or my team, please feel free to use the chat window. I can see a few of the questions already coming through. That's fantastic. But otherwise, I want to sincerely thank you for your time, and I hope this session was your time well spent and was meaningful to you this Friday afternoon. Thank you once again, and I will look forward to any questions, and I'll keep the lines open for the next couple of minutes on the chat. Thank you.